There are moments in life when everything you thought you knew shatters like crystal against stone. For Henry Ashford, the Duke of Ravensmore, that moment arrived on a rain-soaked October evening in 1815 when he walked into the candlelit ballroom of Winterbourne Hall and saw her, Jane Harrington, laughing in the arms of the man he trusted most in this world. He had spent 3 years convincing himself he felt nothing, 3 years building walls of duty and distance, 3 years lying to his own heart. But the heart, it seems, keeps its own ledger, and tonight that ledger came due. This is a story of love realized too late, choices that haunt, and a second chance that might cost everything. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop a comment below telling us where you're from. And don't forget to subscribe for more epic Regency romance stories that will make your heart ache in the best way possible. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight. It drummed against the tall windows of Winterbourne Hall with a rhythm that felt almost accusatory, as if nature itself knew what was coming. Inside the grand ballroom, 200 candles fought against the gloom, their golden light reflecting off silk gowns and polished boots, off champagne flutes, and the perfectly coiffed hair of England's finest. Henry Ashford stood at the entrance, water still beading on his dark greatcoat. He should have removed it, should have handed it to a footman, should have announced himself properly, but he couldn't move. Because across the room, framed by candlelight and the soft blur of waltzing couples, Jane Harrington was dancing with Charles Pemberton, Henry's closest friend since Eton, the man he trusted with his life, his secrets, his estate in his absence. The man he had asked 3 months ago to look after Jane while Henry attended to business in London. Jane's head was tilted back slightly, her mouth curved in genuine laughter, the kind of laughter Henry hadn't heard from her in years. Her chestnut curls, pinned up in the current fashion, caught the candlelight with each turn. The empire waist gown she wore was a soft lavender, morning colours left behind at last, he noted distantly, and it moved around her like water, like something alive. Charles said something Henry couldn't hear, and Jane's smile widened. Henry's chest constricted so violently, he thought for a moment he might be ill. He had seen her in other men's arms before, had watched her dance at a dozen balls over the years with appropriate suitors, with fortune hunters, with sons of earls and viscounts. He had stood on the sidelines with a glass of brandy and perfect indifference, discussing politics and hunting as if his entire world wasn't spinning 3 feet away in a stranger's grip. But this was different. This was Charles. And the way Charles was looking at her, protective, tender, with something dangerously close to devotion in his eyes, made Henry's blood run cold and hot simultaneously. "Your Grace, may I take your coat?" A footman appeared at his elbow, startling him from his paralysis. Henry didn't answer. His jaw was locked, his hands clenched at his sides. He watched as Charles guided Jane through the final turn of the waltz, watched as the music swelled and softened, watched as Charles leaned down to whisper something near her ear. Jane's eyes flickered closed for just a heartbeat. A small private smile touched her lips. And Henry felt something crack open inside his chest, something he had sealed away 3 years ago, when duty demanded he marry elsewhere, when family obligation trumped the quiet, unspoken thing that had grown between him and the daughter of a country vicar. He had chosen responsibility over feeling, had chosen his family's expectations, their ancient name, their need for a bride with a dowry large enough to save the crumbling Ravensmore estates. He had chosen everything except what his heart wanted, and she had understood. Of course she had. Jane always understood everything with that quiet, devastating grace of hers. She had smiled at him the day he announced his engagement to Lady Catherine Wycliffe, had wished him happiness with a steady voice that betrayed nothing. Then his betrothed had died of scarlet fever 2 weeks before the wedding. By then, Jane had already left for Bath with her aunt, had already begun building a life that didn't include waiting for a man who had made his priorities clear. The music ended. Applause rippled through the ballroom. Charles bowed. Jane curtsied. When she straightened, her gaze swept the room with the casual disinterest of someone perfectly content with her present company. Then her eyes found his. She froze mid-breath, her smile faltering. Colour drained from her cheeks, then rushed back in a pink flush that travelled down her neck and disappeared beneath the modest neckline of her gown. Her lips parted slightly, and Henry saw her throat work in a swallow. For 3 heartbeats, the entire ballroom ceased to exist. There was only Jane, and the space between them and the weight of 3 years of silence pressing down like a physical force. Charles followed her gaze, turning to see what had captured her attention so completely. When he recognized Henry, his face broke into a genuine smile of welcome. He raised a hand in greeting, already moving toward the entrance with Jane's fingers still resting lightly on his arm. "Henry, good God, man. We didn't expect you until next week." Charles's voice carried across the space, warm and unsuspecting. "Come, you look like you've ridden through hell itself. The roads from London must be absolutely wretched." Henry forced his body into motion, forced his face into something resembling normalcy, forced his voice to emerge steady and controlled when everything inside him was screaming. The rain made travel difficult. His eyes moved to Jane despite himself. "Miss Harrington." She dipped into a curtsy, her gaze now fixed carefully on the floor. "Your Grace. Welcome home. Your Grace." Not Henry. Not the familiar address she had used when they were younger, when they would walk together through Ravensmoor's gardens and discuss poetry and philosophy and all the impossible dreams of youth. The formality was a blade, sharp and clean. "I hope I'm not interrupting," Henry heard himself say, though the words tasted like ash. "Not at all." Charles clapped him on the shoulder with the easy affection of old friendship. "We're celebrating, actually. I was just about to make an announcement, but now that you're here, it's perfect timing." He glanced at Jane with such open warmth that Henry felt his stomach turn to lead. "You should hear this from me directly, old friend. From both of us." The world tilted slightly. Henry's ears began to ring. "Jane has done me the extraordinary honor," Charles began. "I need a drink," Henry interrupted, his voice coming out rougher than intended. "Forgive me. The journey. I should pay my respects to Lord Winterbourne first, in any case." He turned on his heel before Charles could finish, before Jane could raise those devastating eyes to his face, before he had to hear the words that would make this nightmare real and permanent. Behind him, he heard Charles's confused murmur, heard Jane's soft reply that was too quiet to distinguish. Henry walked through the crowd with mechanical precision, nodding at acquaintances, accepting congratulations on his return, accepting champagne he didn't drink. His face remained perfectly composed, the mask of aristocratic indifference he had perfected over 32 years of breeding and expectation. But inside, in the place where he kept the truth even from himself, something was burning. He had frozen when he saw her in Charles's arms. And in that frozen moment, with his heart suspended between one beat and the next, he had finally understood what every fool learns too late. You never know what you have until someone else holds it. And by then, it's already slipping through your fingers like water, like smoke, like every chance you were too afraid to take. The ballroom pressed in around him, too hot, too bright, too full of people who had no idea his entire world was collapsing. Henry found himself near the terrace doors, the promise of cold air and solitude calling like salvation. He slipped through, grateful for the rain-washed darkness beyond the candlelight. The terrace was empty, as he'd hoped. The rain had stopped at last, leaving everything slick and gleaming. He gripped the stone balustrade, feeling the cold bite through his gloves, anchoring himself in physical sensation because his mind was a chaos he couldn't control. 3 years. He'd had 3 years to do something, to say something, to be brave enough to choose differently, and he'd spent every one of those years congratulating himself on his nobility, his sacrifice, his adherence to duty, had told himself he was protecting Jane from the burden of his failing estate, from a marriage that would drag her down into debt and obligation. He'd been lying. The truth he could finally admit standing alone in the dark, was that he'd been protecting himself from the vulnerability of wanting something he might not get, from the risk of offering everything and being told it wasn't enough, from having to trust that love could matter more than the practical considerations that had ruled his family for generations. Running away already? You've only been back 10 minutes. Henry's shoulders tensed. He didn't turn. "I needed air." "So did I," Jane said quietly. He heard her approach, the whisper of silk against stone, though I suspect for different reasons. She came to stand beside him at the balustrade, careful to maintain a proper distance. The scent of lavender water drifted between them, the same scent she'd always worn, achingly familiar. "You shouldn't be out here," Henry said, his voice coming out harder than intended. "Unchaperoned. People will talk. Let them." There was steel beneath the softness now. "I've spent 3 years being perfectly proper. I think I can risk 5 minutes of scandal." Silence stretched between them, taut as a wire. "Congratulations," Henry forced out. "Charles is a good man. You'll be happy." Jane was quiet for so long, he finally turned to look at her. She was staring out at the rain-dark gardens, her profile illuminated by the light spilling from the ballroom windows. Her jaw was set, a muscle jumping near her ear. "Will I?" she asked softly. "Thank you for informing me. It's nice to have these things decided." The bitterness in her tone struck like a lash. "Jane, don't!" She held up one hand, still not looking at him. "Don't say my name like that, like it matters, like you have any right to care what happens to me." "Of course I care." "Do you?" Now she did turn, and the fury in her eyes made him take a step back. "Because you have a fascinating way of showing it, Your Grace. 3 years of silence, 3 years of nothing. And now you appear at Charles's engagement party looking like—" she gestured at him helplessly. "Like the world is ending, like you have any claim to an opinion about my choices." "I know I have no right." "You're absolutely correct. You don't." Jane's hands were shaking. She clasped them together tightly, her knuckles white. "You gave up that right when you chose Lady Catherine. When you let me leave for Bath without a word. When you made it perfectly clear that whatever I thought existed between us was nothing compared to your obligations." "Catherine died," Henry said, the words scraping his throat raw. "I know." Jane's voice gentled fractionally. "And I'm truly sorry for that tragedy. But you didn't come for me then either, did you? You stayed in London, handled her family's grief with perfect aristocratic grace. And when I returned for the funeral, when I stayed in the county for a month hoping you might acknowledge me, might give me some sign, you sent your steward with condolences and stayed locked away at Ravensmoor like a monk in penance." Each word landed with surgical precision, cutting through every excuse he'd built. "I was giving you time," Henry said desperately. "Space. I couldn't ask you to what? To forgive you? To wait for you? To somehow magically know that your feelings had changed when you gave me absolutely no indication they existed in the first place?" Jane laughed, a broken sound. "You're a coward, Henry Ashford. A noble, dutiful, absolutely infuriating coward, and I'm done waiting for you to be brave." She turned to go. Henry's hand shot out, catching her wrist. "Jane, please." The contact was electric. She froze, staring down at his gloved hand encircling her bare skin. Her pulse hammered visibly at her wrist, wild and fast. "Let me go," she whispered. "I can't." The admission tore out of him. "God help me, I can't. I've tried. I've spent 3 years trying. And I walk into that ballroom and see you with him and I—" His voice broke. "I can't breathe, can't think, can't do anything but realize what a fool I've been." Jane raised her eyes to his. In the dim light, they glittered with unshed tears. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I love you." The words came out ragged, unpolished, 3 years too late. "I'm saying I've loved you since you were 19 and argued with me about Paradise Lost in Charles's father's library. Since you laughed at my terrible jokes and then apologized for being unladylike. Since you sat with me when my father died and didn't offer platitudes, just presence." A tear escaped, tracking down her cheek. "Henry, I'm saying I chose wrong." His hand tightened on her wrist, desperate. "I chose duty and obligation and fear. I chose everything except the one thing that mattered. And I know I have no right to tell you this now. I know it's too late. But I can't watch you marry Charles without you knowing the truth. Which is," her voice was barely audible, "that seeing you in his arms broke something in me I didn't know could break. That I've been half alive for 3 years, pretending contentment was enough. That I love you, Jane, I love you, and I'm terrified. And I have nothing to offer you but a failing estate and a man who learns too late. But I love you." Jane stared at him, her chest rising and falling rapidly. More tears slipped free, silent silver tracks in the candlelight. "You don't get to do this," she said finally, her voice shaking. "You don't get to break my heart 3 years ago and then show up and break it again with words I've wanted to hear since I was 19 years old. You don't get to make me feel this much when I've finally found someone safe, someone who won't destroy me. I know. I hate you," she whispered, but there was no conviction in it, only devastation. "I hate that you still have this power over me, that you can walk into a room and I forget how to breathe. That I'm standing here engaged to a good man, and all I can think about is how much I've missed you." Henry's thumb moved against her wrist, tracing the flutter of her pulse. "Then don't marry him." "What?" "Don't marry Charles." He stepped closer, his other hand coming up to cup her face. She didn't pull away. "Marry me instead. I know I don't deserve you. I know I've made terrible choices. But I'm asking anyway, Jane. I'm begging. Choose me. Give me a chance to spend the rest of my life proving I can be the man you deserve." "You're insane," she breathed. "I'm engaged. The announcement is about to be made. Then we stop it. Right now. We walk back in there, and I tell Charles the truth. I tell everyone the truth. His forehead came to rest against hers, their breath mingling in the small space between them. I'm done hiding, done being noble, done sacrificing what I want because I'm afraid. Say yes, Jane. Please say yes. For a long moment, she just breathed against him, trembling. Then, I want to, she whispered. God help me, I want to say yes so badly I can taste it. But Henry, I'm terrified. What if you change your mind again? What if duty calls and you realize you made another mistake? I can't survive being chosen and then unchosen again. I can't. I won't. He pulled back just enough to look in her eyes, letting her see everything. The fear, the desperation, the absolute certainty beneath it all. I swear to you, Jane, on my father's grave, on the Ravensmore name, on everything I hold sacred, I will never choose anything over you again. Not duty, not obligation, not fear. You. Always you. Jane closed her eyes, fresh tears escaping. Her hands came up to grip his coat, holding on like he was the only solid thing in a tilting world. I need time, she finally said. I need to think. It's too much, too fast. I can't. I'll wait. Henry's hands framed her face tenderly, his thumbs brushing away tears. However long you need. I'll wait, Jane. I'm good at waiting. God knows I've had practice. She laughed despite herself, a wet, broken sound. You're impossible. I'm yours, he corrected quietly. If you'll have me. Before she could respond, the terrace doors opened. Charles stood silhouetted against the light, his expression unreadable. Jane, he said carefully. They're asking for us. For the announcement. Jane pulled away from Henry, wiping quickly at her face. Yes, of course, I'm sorry, I just needed air. I know what you needed, Charles interrupted gently. His eyes moved to Henry. I think we all do. The weight of understanding in those words settled over them like snow. Charles stepped fully onto the terrace, closing the doors behind him. Perhaps, he said slowly, we should discuss this before announcing anything we might regret. The library at Winterbourne Hall smelled of old leather and beeswax, of wood smoke, and the particular mustiness that clings to books too long unread. The three of them stood in awkward arrangement, Charles by the fireplace, Jane near the window, Henry by the door as if ready to flee or fight depending on what came next. I'm not a fool, Charles said finally, breaking the silence. He spoke calmly, without anger, which somehow made it worse. I've suspected for weeks that Jane's heart wasn't entirely as available. I hoped I was wrong, hoped that affection might grow into something more. He looked at Jane with such gentleness that Henry felt his throat constrict. But watching you on that terrace, I can't pretend anymore. Charles, Jane began, her voice thick. Let me finish, please. He held up a hand. I care for you deeply, Jane. You're remarkable. Any man would be lucky to call you his wife. But I don't want to be the man you settle for. The safe choice when your first choice proved too cowardly to claim you. His eyes cut to Henry on that last word. There was no heat in it, just stark observation. Henry flinched, but didn't look away. You're right. I was a coward. I am a coward. But I'm here now. And I'm asking her to give me a chance to be better. Are you? Charles moved from the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back. Or are you asking her to risk everything on a man who has already demonstrated he'll choose obligation over her when pressure comes? Because make no mistake, Henry, that pressure will come again. Ravensmore is drowning in debt. Your mother expects you to marry wealth. Society will call her a fortune hunter, a vicar's daughter reaching above her station. Can you honestly tell me you'll weather that storm? That you won't wake up in 6 months and realize you've made your second catastrophic romantic decision? The questions hung in the air, sharp and unavoidable. Henry met his friend's gaze directly. I can't promise I won't make mistakes. God knows my track record is abysmal, but I can promise that the biggest mistake I ever made was letting her go in the first place. I won't make it again. Pretty words, Charles said quietly. But Jane deserves more than words. She deserves certainty, security, someone who won't make her doubt. I don't want security if it means settling, Jane interjected suddenly. Both men turned to her. She stood straighter, her chin lifting with determination. Charles, you're wonderful, truly. And you're absolutely right that you deserve someone whose whole heart is available. But mine isn't. I've tried to convince myself otherwise for months. I accepted your proposal because you felt safe. Because I thought safe was the same as happy. She moved toward the center of the room, standing equidistant between them. "But Lady Beatrice told me something this morning. She said that choosing to feel nothing is still a choice, one with its own consequences, and I'm tired of choosing safety over honesty." Her eyes moved to Henry. "I'm furious with you. You hurt me. You made me doubt my worth. You taught me that I wasn't important enough to fight for. Those aren't things I can just forgive because you finally decided to be honest." Henry's jaw clenched, but he nodded. "I understand. I'm not finished." Jane's voice strengthened. "But I also know that if I marry Charles while feeling this way about you, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering, regretting, and Charles deserves better than that. We both do." She turned to Charles, her eyes bright with tears. "I'm so sorry. You've been nothing but kind to me, but I can't marry you. Not when my heart is elsewhere." Charles was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. Then he smiled, a sad, genuine smile that held no bitterness. "I appreciate your honesty, truly. It would have been easier to say nothing, to go through with it, and let me discover the truth later. I couldn't do that to you," Jane said softly. "I know. It's one of the things I admire about you." He moved toward her, taking her hand gently. "I hope you find happiness, Jane, wherever it leads you. And if that happiness involves a certain obstinate duke, well," he glanced at Henry, "try not to be an idiot this time, old friend. Some women are worth being brave for." Henry's throat worked. "I know. Do you?" Charles released Jane's hand and crossed to Henry. "Because I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to really hear it. Jane is the kind of woman who will give you everything. Her loyalty, her affection, her complete trust. But if you betray that trust again, if you let fear make you small when she needs you to be brave, you won't get another chance. Not from her, and certainly not from me." "I understand," Henry said hoarsely. "I hope so." Charles clapped him on the shoulder once, a gesture that held both farewell and warning. "Now I need to go inform Lord Winterbourne that I'm calling off my engagement. He's going to be absolutely insufferable about it." He paused at the door, looking back. "I'll handle the gossip. Tell people I had a crisis of conscience, discovered we wouldn't suit, whatever needs saying to protect Jane's reputation. But the rest..." His gaze encompassed both of them. "The rest is up to you two. Don't waste it." He left, closing the door softly behind him. Silence crashed down like a wave. Jane and Henry stood 6 feet apart, the weight of possibility and fear heavy between them. "He's a good man," Henry said finally. "Yes," Jane agreed. "Which makes this harder. Do you regret it? Refusing him?" Jane considered the question seriously. "No. But I am terrified. Because now I have to decide if I can trust you, if I can risk believing your words when your actions have taught me otherwise." Henry moved toward her slowly, like approaching something wild and easily startled. "What would it take? For you to trust me again?" "I don't know," Jane admitted. "Time, maybe. Consistency. Proof that you mean what you say. That this isn't just a moment of passion that will fade when reality sets in. Then I'll give you time." He stopped an arm's length away, close enough to see the gold flecks in her hazel eyes. "I'll court you properly, the way I should have done years ago, before duty and fear made me stupid. I'll prove every day that you matter more than anything, that I'm choosing you." "And your mother," Jane challenged. "Your family's expectations, the debt, all the reasons you chose Catherine over me, those haven't changed, Henry. Ravensmore still needs money. Society will still judge. Your mother will still expect you to marry someone appropriate. Then let her be disappointed." The words came easily, surprising them both. "I've spent my entire life trying to meet everyone's expectations, except my own. Trying to be the perfect duke, the dutiful son, the responsible heir. And where has it gotten me? Alone in a crumbling estate, watching the woman I love nearly marry someone else because I was too afraid to be honest." He caught her hands in his, holding them gently. "I'm done with that, Jane. Done choosing appearances over truth. If society judges, let them. If my mother disapproves, she'll adjust. And as for the debt..." He smiled slightly. "We'll figure it out together. You're clever with finances, as I recall. Always catching errors in your father's parish accounts." Jane felt something loosen in her chest, a knot she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. "You remember that?" "I remember everything about you." His thumbs stroked across her knuckles. "The way you bite your lower lip when you're thinking, how you gesture with your hands when you're excited about an idea, the fact that you hate cucumber sandwiches but are too polite to refuse them at tea." That you cry during thunderstorms because they remind you of the night your father died. Tears pricked her eyes. Henry, I remember it all, Jane, because I've been paying attention for years, even when I was too much of a coward to do anything about it. And if you give me a chance, I'll spend the rest of my life learning even more. Every detail, every preference, every dream. That's... She swallowed hard. That's a lot of pressure. What if I'm not worth it? What if you realize I'm just ordinary? You could never be ordinary. Henry lifted one of her hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. Not to me. The gesture was gentle, reverent. Jane felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. I want to believe you, she whispered. I want to so badly, but I'm scared. So am I. Henry's honesty was stark, vulnerable. I'm terrified I'll fail you. That I'll revert to old patterns when things get difficult. That I'm too damaged by duty to know how to choose love. But I'm willing to try, Jane. I'm willing to fail and learn and keep trying until I get it right. Because the alternative, losing you again, is unthinkable. Jane looked up at him, seeing the fear and hope warring in his eyes, seeing the man beneath the title, flawed and uncertain, and finally honest. I need time, she repeated. Real time, not a week or a month. I need to know this isn't just guilt or possessiveness because you saw me with Charles. I need to know it's real. How much time? Henry asked. I don't know yet. Enough to be sure. For both of us. She squeezed his hands. Can you accept that? Can you be patient? I'll wait as long as you need, Henry said simply. I've already wasted 3 years. I'm not going to rush you into a decision you're not ready for. Take the time you need, Jane. I'll be here when you're ready. If you're ever ready. The vulnerability in that last sentence broke something open in her. She rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his cheek, a feather-like touch that felt like both forgiveness and promise. Thank you, she whispered against his skin. Henry's arms came around her slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. When she didn't, he held her gently, his cheek resting on the top of her head. They stood like that for a long moment, two people caught between past and future, holding on to something fragile and precious, and not quite defined. Outside the library, they could hear the muffled sounds of the ball continuing, music and laughter, and the normal progression of society moving forward. But in the quiet space between heartbeats, everything had changed. The ballroom had reached that point of the evening where champagne had loosened tongues and dancing had flushed cheeks. Lord Winterbourne stood at the head of the room, raising his glass for what the assembled guests assumed would be a joyous announcement. Charles stood beside him, his expression carefully neutral. Henry and Jane had slipped back in through the side entrance, taking positions at opposite ends of the room as if by unspoken agreement. The appearance of propriety, even as everything was crumbling. Ladies and gentlemen, Lord Winterbourne's voice boomed. Here, if I may have your attention. The music stuttered to a halt. Conversation died. 200 faces turned expectantly. Lord Winterbourne's jovial expression faltered slightly as Charles leaned in to whisper something. Henry watched colour rise in the older man's face. Confusion. Then what appeared to be irritation, then something more complex. Ah, Lord Winterbourne said, his enthusiasm notably diminished. Well, it seems plans have evolved. Mr. Pemberton has something to say. Charles stepped forward with remarkable composure. If he was embarrassed or hurt, nothing in his bearing showed it. He was, Henry reflected with both gratitude and guilt, a far better man than most. Thank you all for coming tonight, Charles began, his voice carrying easily across the room. I had intended to make an announcement regarding Miss Harrington and myself. However, upon reflection and honest conversation, we have both realized that while we hold each other in the highest regard, we would not suit as marriage partners. A ripple of shock moved through the crowd. Heads turned, whispers beginning. These things happen, Charles continued calmly. Better to discover incompatibility before vows are spoken than after. Miss Harrington remains a dear friend, and I hope you will all treat her with the respect and kindness she deserves during what I'm sure will be a brief period of speculation. His eyes found Henry's across the room. The message was clear. Your turn. Don't waste this. Lady Beatrice Wyndham chose that moment to step forward, her voice cutting through the rising whispers. How refreshing. A man with the integrity to admit uncertainty rather than proceed with a mismatch. If only more young people had such wisdom. She raised her glass. To Mr. Pemberton's honesty and Miss Harrington's grace. May we all be so clear-sighted. Several people echoed the toast, somewhat uncertainly. It wasn't the scandal fest some had been hoping for, but it also wasn't quite the celebration expected. Lord Winterbourne cleared his throat. Yes, well, the music will resume shortly. Please, continue enjoying the evening. The crowd began to fracture, splitting into groups of animated discussion. Henry saw Jane quickly surrounded by several matrons, whether offering support or fishing for details. He couldn't tell from this distance. Charles appeared at his elbow. I've given you an opening. Try not to bollocks it up. I don't know what to say, Henry admitted. Start with the truth. It's novel for you, but I think you'll find it surprisingly effective. Charles's tone was dry, but not unkind. And Henry, I meant what I said. Hurt her again and I'll call you out, Duke or not. Friendship has its limits. Understood, Henry said quietly. Charles, thank you. You didn't have to handle it so gracefully. Of course I did. I'm a gentleman. Charles smiled slightly. Besides, I'm not entirely altruistic. This way I emerge looking principled rather than rejected. My pride remains intact, and I'm free to pursue Miss Sarah Thornton, who has been eyeing me rather hopefully for the past 2 months. Despite everything, Henry almost laughed. You've had someone else in mind? Not seriously, but Jane deserves someone wholehearted and I wasn't. Not entirely, which I should have admitted sooner. He squeezed Henry's shoulder once. Learn from my mistake. Don't settle. Don't compromise. If you love her, say it clearly and often until she believes you. With that, Charles melted back into the crowd, leaving Henry alone with his thoughts and the weight of opportunity. He made his way toward Jane, who had managed to extract herself from the well-meaning matrons and was now standing near one of the tall windows, her face composed but pale. Miss Harrington, he said formally, aware of eyes on them. Might I have a word? Jane glanced around at their audience, then nodded. Of course, Your Grace. Perhaps the portrait gallery. I find myself in need of art appreciation. They walked in silence through corridors lit by intermittent sconces, their footsteps echoing on marble. The portrait gallery was cold and largely empty, lined with generations of stern-faced Winterbournes judging from their gilded frames. That was excruciating, Jane said once they were safely alone. Charles handled it well, Henry offered. He did. He was kind when he had every right to be bitter. She turned to face him. Which makes me feel terrible. You told him the truth, that's all anyone can ask. Is it? Jane's eyes searched his face. Because the truth is complicated, Henry. I broke an engagement for you, without any guarantee that you won't change your mind again, without any actual commitment or promise. Just hope. Terrifying, uncertain hope. Henry understood what she was asking, what she needed. He took a breath and did the thing that terrified him most, complete vulnerability. Then let me be clear. He moved closer, close enough that he had to look down to meet her eyes. I love you, Jane Harrington. I want to marry you. I want to wake up beside you every morning and debate literature over breakfast. I want to restore Ravensmoor with you and argue about wall colors and curtain fabrics. I want children with your eyes and your laugh. I want to grow old watching you and knowing I was brave enough finally to choose correctly. Jane's breath hitched. Henry, I know I need to earn your trust. I know grand declarations aren't enough after what I've done, so I'm not asking you to say yes tonight. I'm asking for the chance to court you properly, to prove through action, not just words, that you're my priority, that I've learned from my mistakes. He reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. Jane's eyes widened. This was my grandmother's, Henry said, opening the box to reveal a ring, a simple band of gold with a small emerald surrounded by seed pearls. Nothing ostentatious, but beautiful in its understated elegance. Not a betrothal ring, not yet, just a promise, a reminder that I'm serious about this, about us. I can't accept that, Jane whispered, even as her eyes fixed on the ring. People will assume. Let them assume. Or don't wear it publicly yet if you prefer. Keep it in a drawer, take it out and look at it when you need a reminder that I meant what I said. He held the box out to her. No pressure, no expectations, just a tangible symbol that this isn't a moment of impulse, that I've thought about this, chosen this, commit to it. Jane stared at the ring, then at him, then back at the ring. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached out, hovering over the box without quite touching. What if I'm not brave enough? She asked in a small voice. What if I take this and I'm still too afraid to trust you? Then you give it back when you're ready and we remain friends, Henry said simply. I told you, I'll wait, however long it takes. And if that waiting ends with you deciding you can't trust me again, I'll accept that. Devastated, but I'll accept it. A tear slipped down Jane's cheek. She wiped it away impatiently. You're not playing fair. Being patient and understanding when I want to stay angry with you. Would you prefer I demand an immediate answer? Storm around making ultimatums? It would be easier, Jane admitted. A small, watery smile touched her lips. But no. This is better. Harder, but better. She finally took the box from his hands, lifting the ring out carefully. It caught the candlelight, the emerald glowing deep green. Why emerald? She asked. Your eyes, Henry said. In certain light, when you're happy or arguing about something you're passionate about, they have flecks of green mixed with the brown and gold. I wanted to remember that. The way you look when you're most yourself. Jane made a soft sound, somewhere between a laugh and a sob. You're impossible. I'm yours, Henry corrected gently. If you'll have me. Someday. When you're ready. She looked at him for a long moment, the ring cradled in her palm. Then slowly, deliberately, she slipped it onto her right hand. Not her left, not a betrothal, but an acknowledgement nonetheless. I'm not promising anything, she said firmly. This doesn't mean I'm ready to accept a proposal. It just means I'm willing to see, to take the time you're offering and discover if this is real or just 3 years of wanting making us both irrational. That's all I'm asking, Henry said, though his heart was racing at the sight of his grandmother's ring on her finger. And you have to court me properly, Jane continued, warming to her theme. No rushing, no assuming. You have to woo me, Henry Ashford. Make me believe this is different. I can do that, Henry promised. Daily rides in the park, lengthy conversations about Byron and Milton, flowers. All of it, Jane confirmed. And you have to be honest. If you start feeling pressured by your family or society or the debt, you have to tell me. No more noble silence, no more suffering alone. If we do this, we do it as partners, or not at all. Partners, Henry agreed immediately, in everything. I'll start being honest right now. I want to kiss you desperately, but I'm not going to because I know you need time and I refuse to push when you're still uncertain. Jane's lips parted in surprise. Color flooded her cheeks. That's very honest. You asked for honesty. Henry stepped back deliberately, putting proper distance between them. So I'll be honest about my feelings while respecting your boundaries. See? Growth, personal development. You're ridiculous, Jane said, but she was smiling now. A real smile, unguarded and genuine. I'm motivated, Henry corrected. There's a difference. They stood looking at each other, both slightly breathless, the air between them charged with possibility. From the ballroom, faint music drifted, a new waltz beginning. We should return, Jane said reluctantly, before people start assuming worse scandals than a broken engagement. Let me escort you properly then. Give them something boring to look at. Henry offered his arm. Jane took it, her fingers curling around his sleeve. The weight of her touch, light as it was, felt like absolution. They walked back together through portrait-lined corridors, neither speaking but both acutely aware of the shift that had occurred, of the fragile bridge being built between past pain and future possibility. It wasn't resolution, not yet, but it was a beginning. And after 3 years of endings, a beginning felt like grace. The next 6 weeks were an exercise in patience and persistence, unlike anything Henry had ever experienced. He called at Winterbourne Hall every afternoon at precisely 3 o'clock, late enough to be proper, consistent enough to show dedication. Sometimes Jane received him. Sometimes she sent down word that she was indisposed. He never complained, simply left flowers with his card and returned the next day. When she did receive him, they sat in the drawing room with Lady Winterbourne as chaperone, a stern woman who watched Henry with the suspicious eye of someone who had heard about the broken engagement with Charles and formed her own opinions. Tell me about Ravensmore, Jane said during one such visit, her embroidery lying forgotten in her lap. The truth, not the polished version for society. Henry appreciated that she asked with her mother-in-law present. It forced honesty. The east wing is in disrepair, he admitted. The roof leaks in 3 places. The tenants' cottages need work I can't afford to do properly. Revenue from the farms is down because I invested poorly last year in drainage improvements that failed. And my mother writes weekly letters suggesting heiresses I should consider courting, completely ignoring the fact that I've made my intentions clear. Sounds dreadful, Lady Winterbourne observed dryly. It is, Henry agreed. But it's home. And it could be beautiful again with time and careful management and someone clever enough to see possibility instead of just decay. His eyes held Jane's as he said it. She looked down at her embroidery, colour rising in her cheeks, but he saw her smile. Small victories. He brought her books, first editions of poets she loved, philosophy texts he'd heard her mention wanting to read. He wrote notes discussing arguments from their last conversation, keeping their intellectual connection alive, even when physical presence wasn't possible. He took her riding through the countryside with appropriate chaperones, pointing out landmarks from their childhood, telling her stories about the land and its history, sharing not just the polished surface, but the complicated reality of his life. And he listened when she talked about her years in Bath, about the loneliness of being in charity with her aunt, of being neither family nor servant, but something in between. Listened when she confessed her fears about marriage, about losing herself, about becoming just an appendage to someone else's life. "You could never be just anything," Henry told her one afternoon as they walked through Winterbourne's gardens, Lady Winterbourne trailing behind at a discreet distance. "You're too much yourself. Too opinionated and passionate and brilliant to ever fade into the background. You say that now," Jane said, "but wives are expected to defer, to support, to make themselves smaller so their husbands can appear larger." "Then I suppose I'll have to get used to appearing smaller." Henry stopped walking, turning to face her. "Jane, I don't want a decoration. I don't want someone who agrees with everything I say. I want a partner, an equal. Someone who will call me out when I'm being an idiot and celebrate with me when I get it right. I want you, exactly as you are." Jane searched his face. "And when your friends mock you for having an opinionated wife, when your mother complains that I'm not properly subservient, when society whispers that the Duke of Ravensmore is ruled by his wife, then they can whisper," Henry said simply. "I've spent too many years caring what society thinks. I'm done with that particular prison." "It's easy to say when it's theoretical," Jane pointed out. "You're right, so let me prove it with action." Henry glanced back at Lady Winterbourne, who was examining a rose bush with obvious disinterest in their conversation. He lowered his voice. "Come to dinner at Ravensmore next week. Meet my mother. Let her disapprove. Let me show you that I can withstand her displeasure and still choose you." Jane's eyes widened. "That's bold. It's necessary. You need to see that I can face opposition and hold firm. So does my mother. She's been running Ravensmore unchallenged for too long. It's time she understood things are changing." "She'll hate me," Jane predicted. "Probably," Henry agreed. "At first. But she's not cruel, just set in her ways. And she wants me to be happy, even if her definition of my happiness doesn't match reality. Give her time. She'll come around." "You're very confident." "I'm very motivated," Henry corrected, echoing his words from weeks before. "There's a difference." Jane laughed despite herself. "You use that line too often. It works, though." "Sometimes," Jane conceded. Her hand came up to touch the ring on her right hand, a gesture Henry had noticed she made when nervous or thoughtful. She wore it now openly, though she'd been vague with curious questions about its origin. "All right. Dinner at Ravensmore. But if your mother throws wine at me, I reserve the right to leave immediately." "If my mother throws wine at you, I'll drive you home myself and send her to the Dower House," Henry promised. The dinner was, predictably, a disaster. The Dowager Duchess of Ravensmore was a tall, regal woman who had been beautiful in her youth and knew it. She swept into the drawing room where Henry and Jane waited with the air of someone entering a battlefield fully armed. "Miss Harrington," she said, her tone making Jane's name sound like an accusation. "How unexpected." "Mother," Henry said with warning in his voice, "thank you for accommodating my request on short notice." "As if I had a choice," the Dowager said, settling into her chair like a queen on a throne. "You've been quite insistent lately, Henry. First the debacle with Mr. Pemberton's engagement, then daily calls at Winterbourne Hall. People are talking." "Let them talk," Henry said calmly. "Easy for you to say. You're a man, a duke. Your reputation can weather scandal, but Miss Harrington—" She turned her sharp gaze to Jane. "Tell me, my dear, what exactly are your intentions toward my son?" Jane's spine straightened. "With respect, Your Grace, I believe that question should be directed toward your son, regarding his intentions toward me." The Dowager's eyebrows rose. "Bold." "Honest," Jane corrected, using Henry's vocabulary. "I have been very clear about my expectations for any potential courtship. Your son is the one pursuing. I am the one considering whether his actions match his words." "How very modern," the Dowager said dryly. "In my day, young ladies didn't consider. They accepted the honor of an offer with appropriate gratitude. In your day, young ladies also had fewer options, Jane replied evenly. I'm fortunate enough to have means and education enough to be selective. I won't apologize for that. Henry watched the exchange with something between pride and terror. Jane wasn't backing down, wasn't trying to be what she thought his mother wanted. She was being completely, authentically herself. It was magnificent. You have means. The dowager's tone was skeptical. Forgive me, but I was under the impression your father was a country vicar. He was. He also invested wisely and left me a small independence. Nothing grand, but enough that I won't starve if I remain unmarried. Jane met the dowager's eyes directly. Which means if I choose to marry, it will be for love and compatibility, not survival. How extraordinarily convenient. Mother, Henry interjected, his voice hard. That's enough. Is it? I think I'm entitled to understand what sort of woman my son is considering binding himself to, especially after his poor judgment with the Pemberton situation. My judgment was perfect regarding the Pemberton situation, Henry said coldly. Charles was honorable enough to recognize incompatibility. Would you have preferred I let Miss Harrington marry another man while knowing I loved her? Would that have satisfied your sense of propriety? The dowager went very still. You love her. Yes, Henry said simply. I have for years. I was simply too much of a coward to admit it until recently. And her feelings. The dowager looked at Jane. Does she return this sentiment, or is this simply one-sided infatuation my son will recover from given time? Jane felt her face heat, but held the dowager's gaze. I care for your son deeply. Whether that care is sufficient foundation for marriage remains to be seen. Hence the courtship. Honest, at least, the dowager acknowledged, though honesty and wisdom are not the same thing. She leaned forward slightly. Tell me, Miss Harrington, what do you know about managing an estate, hosting society events, navigating ton politics? Very little, Jane admitted, but I learn quickly, and I understand estate finances, having helped my father manage parish accounts for years. I understand people, having worked with parishioners from every social level, and I understand that true power in society comes not from following arbitrary rules, but from kindness, integrity, and treating people with respect regardless of their station. How idealistic. How practical, Jane corrected. I've watched aristocrats destroy their own reputations through cruelty and arrogance. I've watched common people build influence through generosity and wisdom. Station matters less than character. Always. The dowager was quiet for a long moment, studying Jane with unreadable eyes. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. A small, genuine smile that transformed her face. You have a spine, girl. Good. You'll need it. Married to an Ashford. We're stubborn, self-righteous, and terrible at admitting when we're wrong. She glanced at Henry. Present company especially. Henry let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Is that approval? It's acknowledgement that you could do far worse, the dowager said, though whether you could do better remains unclear. She stood, smoothing her skirts. Miss Harrington, you may call me Judith. Your grace is far too formal for daily interaction, and I suspect you'll be around frequently if my son has his way. Thank you, Jane said, standing as well. I appreciate your candor. I doubt that. I've been rather rude. Judith moved toward the door, then paused. A word of advice, my dear. Henry's father was very like him, noble to a fault. Chose duty over his own happiness so often he forgot what happiness felt like. It took me years to teach him that being a good duke and being a happy man weren't mutually exclusive. Her eyes softened. Don't let Henry make his father's mistakes. He needs someone strong enough to remind him he's allowed to want things, allowed to choose joy. With that, she swept out, leaving Henry and Jane alone in the suddenly quiet drawing room. That went better than expected, Henry said after a moment. Jane laughed, slightly hysterical, but genuine. Your mother terrifies me. She terrifies everyone. It's her favorite hobby. Henry moved closer, his eyes searching Jane's face. You were extraordinary. Everything I said you were. Brilliant, passionate, uncompromising. I was rude to a dowager duchess, Jane corrected. I'm going to wake up tomorrow and die of mortification. You were honest to a woman who respects honesty above all else. Trust me, you impressed her. Henry caught her hands. You impressed me too. Watching you refuse to make yourself smaller, refuse to apologize for who you are, Jane. I've never been more certain that you're the only woman I could ever be happy with. Don't, Jane said, but there was no heat in it. Don't propose when I'm still processing the fact that I survived dinner with your terrifying mother. I'm not proposing, just observing. His thumbs traced circles on her hands. Have I earned your trust yet? Even a little? Jane considered. 6 weeks of consistent attention. 6 weeks of vulnerability and effort. 6 weeks of Henry showing up, being honest, proving through action that he meant what he said. It wasn't everything, but it was something. A little, she admitted. Enough to keep seeing you, enough to imagine possibility. Possibility is enough, Henry said, for now. He raised one of her hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was familiar now. He did it every time they parted, but tonight it felt weighted with new meaning. Jane felt something shift inside her. Not trust, not quite, but the first fragile stirrings of hope that maybe, just maybe, this could work. That love could be enough. That choosing feeling over safety didn't have to mean destruction. Walk me to my carriage, she asked softly. Always, Henry promised, and he did, his arm solid beneath her hand, his presence steady and real beside her as they moved through Ravensmoor's lamplit corridors toward the future they were carefully, courageously building together. Winter settled over the countryside with quiet determination. The first snow came early that year, transforming the landscape into something pristine and new. Jane stood at her bedroom window at Winterbourne Hall, watching ice crystals form patterns on the glass. She'd been awake for hours, unable to sleep, the weight of decision pressing down like physical force. 3 months. 3 months since Charles had ended their engagement. 3 months of Henry's careful courtship. 3 months of watching him prove, day after day, that he meant what he said. He'd brought her to meet his tenants, introducing her with pride rather than apology, had asked her opinion on estate improvements and actually implemented her suggestions, had defended her to his mother during several tense dinners, never wavering in his support even when Judith's disapproval was palpable. He'd been patient when Jane needed space, persistent when she tried to retreat into fear. Honest about his struggles, the financial pressures, the moments when duty whispered that he was being selfish, the terror that he would somehow fail her again. And slowly, carefully, Jane's walls had come down. Last night, he'd kissed her. They'd been walking through Ravensmoor's snow-covered gardens, properly chaperoned by a maid trailing at a distance. Henry had been telling her about plans for the spring planting when he'd stopped suddenly, turning to face her. I can't wait anymore, he'd said quietly. May I kiss you, Jane? The asking had undone her. The fact that he requested permission, that he gave her the power to refuse even after months of courtship, it was such a stark contrast to the man who had once made decisions for her without consultation. She'd nodded, breathless. The kiss had been gentle at first, a soft press of lips, careful and questing. Then Jane had fisted her hands in his coat and pulled him closer, and the kiss had deepened into something that made her forget the cold, forget the watching maid, forget every reason she'd been protecting her heart. When they'd finally separated, both breathing hard, Henry had rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, he'd whispered. Please, Jane. I know I said I'd wait as long as you needed, but I love you and I'm asking. Marry me. She'd asked for time to think about it. Now, watching snow fall in the pre-dawn darkness, Jane knew her answer. She was terrified, still carried the scars of being chosen second once before, still worried that his family's disapproval would eventually wear him down, that financial pressure would make him resent her, that the reality of marriage would tarnish the romance of courtship. But beneath the fear was something stronger, certainty. Certainty that Henry had changed, that he'd proven himself not through grand gestures, but through consistent daily choice, that he loved her not despite her independence, but because of it. Certainty that being safe was not the same as being happy, that avoiding pain also meant avoiding joy. Certainty that she loved him, had always loved him, and that love was worth the risk. Jane dressed quickly, pulling on her warmest wool dress and cloak. She scribbled a quick note for Lady Winterbourne, then slipped out of the house before anyone could stop her. The road to Ravensmoor was treacherous with fresh snow, but her horse was sure-footed. Dawn was breaking by the time she arrived, the sky turning from black to deep blue to pale gold. The butler who answered her knock looked scandalized. Miss Harrington, at this hour? Unchaperoned? I need to see the Duke, Jane said firmly. It's urgent. His Grace is not yet. I'm here, Matthews. Henry appeared at the top of the stairs, still in shirt sleeves and breeches. his hair disheveled from sleep. He took in Jane's snow-dusted appearance with wide eyes. "Jane, what's wrong? Has something happened?" "Yes," Jane said. "I've made a decision." Henry came down the stairs 2 at a time, stopping just short of touching her. "What decision?" Jane looked at him, really looked at him, at the fear and hope warring in his eyes, at the way he held himself carefully, giving her space even though she could see he wanted to reach for her, at the man he'd become through months of patient effort. "Ask me again," she said quietly. "Ask you—" Understanding dawned. Henry's breath caught. "Jane, ask me," she repeated, "properly, right now, before I lose my courage." Henry took her hands, unmindful of the scandalized butler still hovering nearby. "Jane Harrington, will you marry me? Will you take on a crumbling estate and a reformed coward, and a life that will undoubtedly be complicated? Will you argue with me about curtains and finances and philosophy? Will you be my partner, my equal, my everything?" Tears pricked Jane's eyes. "Yes." "Yes?" Henry pulled her closer, his voice rough with emotion. "You mean it?" "I mean it," Jane confirmed. "I'm terrified and uncertain, and still half convinced you'll realize you made a mistake. But I love you, Henry Ashford, and I'm choosing you, choosing us, choosing to be brave." Henry kissed her then, deep and thorough and full of 3 years of waiting. Jane kissed him back with equal fervor, her arms winding around his neck, her body pressing against his. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Matthews was nowhere to be seen, fled presumably from such impropriety. "We need to get you a chaperone," Henry said, not loosening his hold. "We need to plan a wedding," Jane corrected. "Quickly, before I change my mind." "You won't change your mind." Henry's confidence was absolute. "You're too stubborn. Once you commit to something, you see it through." "You barely know me," Jane protested, but she was smiling. "I know you completely," Henry corrected, "and I plan to spend the rest of my life learning even more." They married 6 weeks later in a small ceremony that scandalized some and delighted others. Jane wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit. Henry wore his father's signet ring alongside the new gold band Jane placed on his finger. The Dowager Duchess attended with obvious approval, having warmed considerably to Jane over multiple dinners and frank conversations. Charles stood as Henry's witness, happy for them both and already courting Miss Sarah Thornton with dedicated enthusiasm. Lady Beatrice wept copiously and declared it the most romantic thing she'd witnessed in decades. And when the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, when Henry kissed Jane in front of God and witnesses and all their complicated history, it felt like coming home. Not to a place, but to each other. To honesty, to vulnerability, to the terrifying, beautiful work of choosing love every single day. The life they built. 5 years later, Ravensmoor had been transformed. The east wing was repaired, the roof no longer leaked, and the tenants' cottages had been rebuilt according to Jane's practical designs. The estate wasn't wealthy by aristocratic standards, but it was solvent, managed carefully by both Henry and Jane working together, their combined skills proving more effective than either could have managed alone. Jane had taken to estate management with unexpected passion, discovering she had a talent for negotiation and financial planning. The tenants respected her, society had eventually accepted her, and Judith had become not just an ally but a genuine friend. Henry had learned to delegate, to trust, to ask for help instead of bearing every burden alone, had learned that strength sometimes meant admitting weakness, that being a good duke didn't require sacrificing his own happiness. On a warm June afternoon, Henry found Jane in the newly restored gardens, sitting on a stone bench with their 2-year-old daughter Eleanor, who was chasing butterflies with single-minded determination. "She has your stubbornness," Henry observed, settling beside his wife. "She has your terrible timing," Jane countered. "Do you know what time she woke up this morning?" "Before dawn." "Before dawn," Jane confirmed. "Demanding stories about dragons and knights. Your daughter, definitely." "Our daughter," Henry corrected, pulling Jane against his side. She came willingly, her head resting on his shoulder in a gesture so familiar it felt like breathing. They sat in comfortable silence, watching Eleanor toddle through the flower beds. "Do you ever regret it?" Jane asked quietly. "Choosing me instead of someone who could have brought money, connections, an easier path?" Henry had learned not to dismiss these questions, however many times they'd been asked and answered. Jane's fears were real, earned through experience. They deserved acknowledgement. "Never," he said simply. "Not once. Not even in the hardest moments." He turned to look at her fully, Do you regret choosing me? Choosing the complicated path instead of the safe one? Jane considered, as she always did, taking the question seriously rather than offering easy platitudes. Sometimes I'm terrified, she admitted. I wake up and wonder if this is all a dream. If I'll discover you've grown tired of my opinions, my independence, the fact that I'll never be the perfect duchess your mother was. Good thing I don't want the perfect duchess my mother was, Henry said. I want you, imperfect, opinionated, absolutely irreplaceable you. Even when I'm difficult. Especially then. Your difficulty is what saved us both. He kissed her temple. Besides, you tolerate my brooding and my terrible habit of taking on too much responsibility. Fair trade. Jane laughed, the sound warming something deep in Henry's chest even after 5 years of marriage. Eleanor shrieked with delight, having successfully caught a butterfly only to immediately release it. She ran toward them with arms outstretched, her dark curls bouncing. Papa, Mama, did you see? Did you see? We saw, darling, Jane assured her, catching their daughter and settling her between them. You were very gentle. The butterfly appreciated that. Eleanor beamed, then proceeded to launch into a detailed explanation of butterfly behavior that was mostly imagination with occasional facts mixed in. Henry listened with half his attention, the rest focused on the woman beside him and the life they'd built together. It wasn't the life society had expected for the Duke of Ravensmoor. It wasn't the safe, predictable path Jane could have chosen with Charles. But it was real. Messy and imperfect, and occasionally difficult, but real in a way that satisfied something fundamental in both of them. I love you, Henry said quietly, interrupting Eleanor's monologue about butterfly kingdoms. Jane looked at him with those hazel eyes that still made his breath catch. I know. You mentioned it this morning, and last night, and approximately 12 times yesterday. Insufficient, Henry declared, echoing words from years ago that had become their private joke. I have a lifetime to make up for. You'll be hearing it constantly. I suppose I can endure that, Jane said, smiling the smile that was only for him. Unguarded, radiant home. Eleanor tugged on Henry's sleeve. Papa, do you love Mama? More than anything in the world, Henry said seriously. Except possibly you, but it's very close. Henry, Jane protested, laughing. What? It's true. You tied for first place the moment she was born. He scooped Eleanor up, making her giggle. Though she's currently winning because she doesn't argue with me about estate finances. Give her time, Jane said dryly. She's definitely our daughter. The arguing is inevitable. They walked back toward Ravensmoor together, Henry carrying Eleanor, Jane's hand tucked into his free arm, as the afternoon sun painted everything gold. Inside, the house was alive with activity, servants preparing dinner, Judith in the drawing room with her correspondence. The comfortable chaos of a home that was lived in, loved, full of imperfect people choosing each other daily. That evening, after Eleanor had been put to bed with multiple stories and 3 glasses of water, Henry and Jane stood together in their private sitting room. Jane moved to the window, looking out over the gardens they'd restored together. Henry came up behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For being brave, for giving me a second chance when I didn't deserve it, for building this life with me. He tightened his hold. For choosing feeling over safety. Jane covered his hands with hers, their wedding rings catching the lamplight. Thank you for being worth the risk. For proving that love doesn't have to mean losing yourself. For showing up every day, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard, Henry corrected. Especially then, Jane agreed. They stood like that as darkness fell and stars emerged. 2 people who had nearly lost each other, who had been brave enough to try again, who had learned that the best love stories aren't about perfect timing or easy choices. They're about honesty, vulnerability, the daily decision to stay, to try, to keep choosing each other, even when fear whispers that safety might be easier. They're about freezing in a ballroom and finally understanding what matters. About realizing before it's too late that some risks are worth taking, that some people are worth fighting for. That love, real, complicated, imperfect love, is always worth the courage it demands. Outside, an owl called in the darkness. Inside, Ravensmoor settled into evening quiet, full of the peaceful contentment that comes from being exactly where you're meant to be, with exactly who you're meant to be with. Finally, completely, home. 10 years later. The library at Ravensmoor had become Jane's favorite room in the entire estate, Henry had renovated it as a 10th anniversary gift. New shelves, comfortable chairs by the fireplace, large windows that flooded the space with light. She sat there now, reviewing estate accounts, when she heard raised voices in the hallway. "Absolutely not fair. Eleanor gets to go to London for the season and I have to stay here with tutors." Jane smiled, recognizing their son William's indignant tone. At 8 years old, he had perfected the art of dramatic protest. "Eleanor is 18, Henry's patient voice responded. "You're 8. The mathematics are somewhat different. But I want to see London. And you will, when you're older. For now, you have Latin to study." "Latin is stupid. Latin is the foundation of William. Come back here." Small footsteps thundered past the library door. Henry appeared a moment later, looking harried. "He's hiding in the East Wing again, isn't he?" Jane asked, setting down her pen. "Almost certainly. That boy has your talent for strategic retreat." Henry collapsed into the chair beside her desk. "When did parenting become this exhausting?" "Around the time you insisted we needed 3 children instead of stopping at 2, Jane said dryly. As if summoned, their 5-year-old daughter Margaret appeared in the doorway, holding a slightly bedraggled kitten. "Mama, Mr. Whiskers is sick. He needs medicine." "Mr. Whiskers ate too many treats from the kitchen," Jane said. "He needs rest, not medicine." "But, Margaret Charlotte Ashford, take that kitten to the stables where he belongs, wash your hands, and then you may come help me with these accounts." Margaret's eyes lit up. At 5, she was already showing an alarming aptitude for numbers and a complete disinterest in traditional feminine accomplishments. "Really? I can help. Really? Go on." Margaret scampered off, kitten in tow. Henry watched his wife with undisguised admiration. "How do you do that? Make them obey without even raising your voice?" "Practice. And the fact that I actually follow through on consequences, unlike someone who threatened to cancel William's birthday party 3 times last month, and then threw him the biggest party in the county. He apologized for putting frogs in the governess's desk," Henry defended himself. "After the 3rd offense, Henry, after. I'm a soft touch. You married me knowing this." Jane smiled, reaching out to take his hand. "I married you knowing many things. Your terrible discipline methods. Your habit of taking on too much. Your absolute inability to say no to our children's pleading faces. And yet you stayed," Henry marveled, bringing her hand to his lips. "And yet I stayed," Jane confirmed. "Though lately I'm questioning that decision. Latin is stupid. Where did he even learn such language?" "Probably from his mother, who called the Duchess of Pemberton's new curtains aggressively hideous at dinner last week." "They were aggressively hideous," Jane said without remorse. "And she asked my opinion. She asked if you liked them. I answered honestly. You're always telling me honesty is important in a marriage." Henry laughed, pulling her from her chair and into his lap. "You're impossible." "I'm yours," Jane corrected, using his words from years ago. "Yes," Henry agreed, kissing her soundly. "Always mine." They were interrupted by Eleanor sweeping into the library with all the dramatic flair of an 18-year-old preparing for her first London season. "Papa, Mama, oh honestly, must you always be so affectionate? I'm trying to ask about ball gowns and you're acting like newlyweds." "We contain multitudes," Henry said, not releasing Jane. "What about ball gowns?" Eleanor proceeded to outline her requirements in exhaustive detail. Jane listened with half her attention, the rest focused on the weight of Henry's arms around her, the comfortable solidity of 10 years together, the beautiful chaos of the life they'd built. It wasn't the storybook ending society would have written. It was better. It was real. 15 years later, the Duke and Duchess of Ravensmore were hosting their annual summer garden party, an event that had become legendary in the county for its informality and genuine welcome. Peers mixed with tenants, merchants with younger sons, all enjoying the abundant food and entertainment Jane had organized with her characteristic efficiency. Henry stood on the terrace watching his wife move through the crowd, stopping to chat with everyone from the village blacksmith's wife to Lady Pemberton, treating them with equal warmth. "She's extraordinary," Charles said, appearing at Henry's elbow. He'd aged well, married now to Sarah with 4 children of his own. "I don't know how you convinced her to take you on." "Neither do I," Henry admitted. "Daily I expect her to come to her senses." "After 15 years? I think you're safe." Charles smiled. "Though Sarah says Jane still has nightmares sometimes, about being chosen second." Henry's expression clouded. "Less frequently now. But yes, some scars don't fully heal. I just try to prove, every day, that she was always first." that choosing Catherine was the aberration, not choosing Jane. Does she believe you? Most days. Henry's eyes found Jane in the crowd again. She was laughing at something the vicar had said, her face bright with genuine amusement. On the hard days, I hold her and remind her, as many times as she needs to hear it. You're a better man than you were, Charles observed. She made me better, Henry said simply, demanded I be better, wouldn't accept anything less than my complete honesty and presence. They watched in comfortable silence as Jane made her way back toward the terrace, stopping to settle a dispute between two of the younger children with the practiced ease of someone who had raised 3 strong-willed offspring. Your Grace, she said formally when she reached them, her eyes dancing. The Marchmont twins are sword-fighting with the garden stakes again. I've been informed this is the father's responsibility. They're not my children, Henry protested. You're the Duke. Apparently that makes all rambunctious behavior your jurisdiction. Jane handed him her champagne glass. Good luck. I'm going to hide in the library. She swept away before he could protest. She's not actually going to the library, Charles predicted. No, she's going to solve whatever crisis is happening in the kitchen while letting me think she's relaxing, Henry agreed. She does this every party. And you let her? She needs to feel useful. I need to feel like I'm protecting her from something. We both pretend our roles are real and everyone's happy. Henry grinned. Marriage is an elaborate fiction we've perfected. He went to deal with the Marchmont twins, reflecting that the fiction of marriage had become the most real thing in his life. 25 years later, they were old now, or at least older. Henry's hair had gone silver. Jane's chestnut curls were streaked with white. But they moved together with the unconscious coordination of people who had spent a quarter-century learning each other's rhythms. Read to me, Jane asked, settling onto the settee in their private sitting room. Her eyes had grown weak in recent years, making her beloved books difficult to manage for long periods. Henry picked up the book they'd been working through, Paradise Lost, appropriately. He'd read it to her a dozen times over the years, and it never grew old. He read Milton's sonorous verses while Jane leaned against his shoulder, her eyes closed, a small smile on her face. When he finished the canto, she was quiet for a long moment. Do you remember the first time we argued about this? She finally asked. In Charles's father's library, you insisted Milton was too sympathetic to Satan. I said that was the point, that complexity is more interesting than simple morality. I remember thinking you were the most fascinating person I'd ever met, Henry said, and being terrified by how much I wanted to keep talking to you forever. Why didn't you tell me? Then, I mean, when we were young. They'd had this conversation before, in various forms over the years, but Jane still asked sometimes, needing the reassurance. Because I was a coward, Henry said simply, because I thought love was a luxury and duty was everything. Because I had to almost lose you completely before I understood what mattered. Do you regret the time we lost? Every day, Henry admitted, but I'm grateful for the time we found. And I'm grateful you were brave enough to give me a second chance. Jane turned to look at him, her hazel eyes still sharp despite their physical weakness. I wasn't brave. I was terrified. I'm still terrified sometimes that this will all disappear, that I'll wake up and discover it was a dream. Then I'll remind you it's real, Henry said, as he had countless times before. You're real, this is real, the life we built, the children we raised, the love we chose, all of it real. Promise? Jane asked, and her voice was suddenly young again, the voice of the 19-year-old girl who had argued with him about poetry and made him feel alive. I promise, Henry said solemnly. You're stuck with me, Jane Ashford, in this life and whatever comes after. He'll find you in every lifetime and choose you in all of them. That's very romantic for a reformed coward, Jane teased, but there were tears in her eyes. You bring out my romantic side. He kissed her forehead gently. Among other things. We're too old for other things, Jane protested, but she was smiling. Speak for yourself. I'm in my prime. You're 71. A very prime 71. Jane laughed, the sound filling the room with warmth and memory, and the accumulated joy of 25 years together. Outside, their grandchildren played in the gardens they'd restored together. Inside, Ravensmoor stood solid and whole, a testament to what could be built when two people chose each other daily. And in the quiet sitting room, the Duke and Duchess of Ravensmoor held each other close, grateful for every moment, the ones they'd found and even the ones they'd lost, because the losing had taught them the value of the finding. I love you, Henry said, because some things never grew old with repetition. I know, Jane replied. You've mentioned it approximately 47 million times over the years. Insufficient, Henry declared, their ancient joke. I'll need at least another 47 million. I suppose I can endure that, Jane said, and kissed him with all the passion of their youth, tempered by the tenderness of their years. And they lived like that, choosing each other daily, completely, until the end of their days and beyond. Because some love stories don't end. They transform, deepen, become the foundation that everything else is built upon. They become not just a story, but a legacy. Not just a choice, but a lifetime of choices. Not just love, but the work and courage and daily commitment that makes love real. And in the end, that's the only kind of love story worth telling.
Pretending I was free, but every road I ever chose still led my heart to thee. Oh, time does not forget. What the heart has sworn. Love waits in the shadows. Till courage is reborn. When I finally chose you, the world fell quiet inside. No crown, no vow, no promise ever felt so alive. I laid down fear and reason at the mercy of truth. I was never lost, my love. I was waiting for you. I wore my pride like armor. I called distance control. But every night your name was the ache inside my soul. I learned too late that safety is not the same as home. That love demands a braver heart than one that stands alone. What we bury alive, it waits for hearts to learn. When I finally chose you, I chose the fire, not the shore. I chose the risk of breaking over silence evermore. Let the world call it madness. Let the past call it wrong. I choose you in every lifetime, in every breath, every song. Across the years, across the fear, what is true will always hear. Two souls circle pulled by fate. Love arrives even late. I choose you when it's easy. I choose you when it's hard.